So when I was at McGuire Woods, and it was kind of time, it was like the year was kind of coming where I was like, this is the time to make the transition. And the opportunity that worked out for me was in the Federal Public Defender's Office. And it was a wild transition, I'll tell you, to go from having all the resources of a giant law firm to being a public defender. I remember early on texting this partner from McGuire Woods, who is still a dear friend to this day, and saying, do you want to know how many people read this brief before I filed it in the Fourth Circuit? None. No one read it. I'm the only one. I finished writing it, and then I filed it. And it was crazy coming from a law firm context where every single thing you wrote was going to be like carefully edited about 1,000 times.
This is Admissible. I'm Natalie Blazer, Dean of Admissions at UVA Law. I am so excited about today's show because I get to welcome one of my law school classmates into the studio, which I've done before and it's always a fun time. My guest today is Lisa Lorish, a judge on the Virginia Court of Appeals. Prior to her election to the bench, Judge Lorish served as an assistant federal public defender and the appellate specialist for the Western District of Virginia, and spent several years in private practice as a litigator with McGuire Woods and Sullivan and Cromwell. Judge Lorish graduated cum laude from Princeton University in 2003 and from the University of Virginia School of Law in 2008, where she was an Order of the Coif member, the Essays Development Editor for the Virginia Law Review, a John M. Olin Scholar in Law and Economics, and a 2008 recipient of the Raven Award. Judge Lorish is also a lecturer at UVA Law and is currently teaching law and riots as well as state constitutional law, litigation, and adjudication. Whew. Welcome to the show, Judge Lorish, but since we are classmates and friends, if it's okay, I will call you Lisa.
Definitely.
I'm so happy you're here. I mentioned the Raven Award, and this just occurred to me, like, I looked up what it was, because I have never gotten it. Do they tell you what you're getting it for, or is it just for being, like, scholarly?
They do, and my kids were actually just asking me about this the other day because we have a weird statue of Edgar Allan Poe's head on our bookshelf, and that was the Raven Award. And you get nominated for some sort of public service contribution you've made. So I had helped start a program at the law school when I was there that provided tutoring for other law students who were having difficulty understanding the material, and because of that, someone had nominated me for the award, and I received it.
That's really cool. How did you think to start that? I didn't even know that. I probably could have used the tutoring.
I think I realized what an impact, for better or for worse, your grades in first year of law school have and how stressed out so many students are. And that it felt that, for people who it came more easily to, it would just be a great act of service to help meet with younger students who were feeling overwhelmed. And so that's what we did.
That's awesome. Yeah. That is well-deserving of the Raven Award. So I'm really just so excited to talk about what it's like being a judge. We have never had a judge on the show before, so this is the first time. But before we go to that, I sort of want to wind back to the beginning.
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up on a farm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Amish country.
Amish country, that's right.
Wow.
So we had a lot of tobacco fields, a lot of hogs, a lot of country.
And where did you go to high school? In Lancaster?
Yes, I went to public high school, Warwick High. Go Warriors. And from there, knew pretty early on that I didn't think I was cut out for farming life and thought I would try to get to college somewhere different, and was really lucky to get to go to Princeton. They had incredible financial aid, so we were able to go. My parents were able to send me there for basically no money.
Wow.
And which was an incredible educational start, obviously, for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And when you were at Princeton, was law school like on your radar at that time?
Yeah, so I didn't really know any lawyers growing up where I did. Everyone in my family were basically farmers, or some teachers, certainly no lawyers. And at the same time, I was quite argumentative, I'm told. And so, people would always say things like, oh, you should go to law school. But I really didn't know what that meant. So when I was in college, I took a couple classes. I remember taking a great constitutional law class and a civil liberties class and thought they were really interesting. I took the LSAT without really studying, kind of thinking, like, that's what you should do. And I did okay, but I didn't do, like, amazingly well.
Yeah.
And then I realized, law school costs a lot of money. And I just sort of thought, like, well, I'm sort of interested, but I'm not really sure. So I made the decision to move to Boston. I wanted to try out what was life going to be like in a big city and to kind of just figure out what am I interested in. And I got a job working as a project analyst, which is basically mostly like a paralegal at this law firm, Mintz Levin.
Oh,
in Boston.
nice. Yeah.
So it was a 2-year program, and I got to do a little bit of public policy work, a little bit of consulting work, and a lot of just supporting the lawyers at the firm. And it was while I was there that I realized, like, oh, my brain works this way. And you can do so many things with the law. I really think that even though I'm going to have to take out loans to go to law school, this is going to be a good investment of my time and energy. So then I really buckled down, spent a lot of Sunday afternoons taking practice LSAT tests, and I did really well the second time around and was really lucky to be admitted to UVA.
Yeah. So it's a perfect segue because I want to hear what you remember about your application process. Sounds like you remember studying for the LSAT.
Yep.
You took it. It sounds like total of 2 times.
Yep.
And by the way, a lot of people, I tell them it's not a diagnostic situation. You want you right, like you can prepare for it and
Absolutely. I'm like living proof that if you practice, you can get better at the LSAT.
Yeah. And how did you decide where all to apply?
Well, it was a little more complicated because I met the person I was ultimately going to marry while I was living in Boston working at that law firm. And we got engaged, and we were trying to pick a place for me to go to law school that also worked for my soon-to-be husband to kind of pursue his academic interests as well. So I applied to mostly places on the East Coast that were in big cities that had a lot of possibilities of other educational opportunities for him. So I applied to schools in the Boston area, in the New York area, and then Charlottesville had an incredible, obviously, university, UVA, which had a great religion department, which is what my husband was interested in studying. So it was a natural, great fit when I got into the law school here, and he could pursue his studies and ultimately end up getting a PhD from UVA while we were here.
Well, that all worked out.
Yeah, it worked out pretty great.
So when you and I met 20 years ago,
Wow.
You were engaged. I don't think I knew
I was
that.
already married.
You were already married?
Yeah, I got married a week before starting law school and took a honeymoon to Costa Rica. Our flight got canceled on the way back, so I'd already gotten special permission to miss the orientation at law school. And then I was going to get in like a day before for like the last whatever. But then we ended up driving through the night from Boston to Charlottesville. I absolutely did my roommates dirty because we were moving out and we're just like, sorry, I couldn't get rid of this bed. I couldn't get rid of this couch. Can you guys just deal with that? I've got to get to law school.
Oh, my God.
So we drove through the night and I rolled into my first class and everyone was like, who are you? And where have you been? So that's how I started law school.
And by the way, I'm the one who approves people to miss orientation.
Sorry, you probably shouldn't miss orientation.
You shouldn't miss it. But also, like, it's so tough to get approved now. I feel like back then it was probably a little bit more lax because orientation, they do so much more programming now.
Absolutely.
Than they
Everyone
did
should
when
go to
we were
orientation.
there. Yeah. What section were you in?
L.
Section L. Okay. I ask because all the 1Ls today are practicing for Dandelion. They are all out there like working on their skits and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a vague memory of that.
I know. Yeah, very vague.
I remember softball a bit more.
We're going to talk about softball. So you already answered my question how you decided to attend UVA because it made sense for you. And
it was a simple calculus of the best school I got into and a place we wanted to live that gave me the most money. So
perfect.
All lined up.
Checked all those boxes.
Exactly.
That's great. So when you were in law school, did you remember having like a favorite class or professor?
Yeah, it's safe to say that I just fell in love with all the classes about criminal law. And there weren't as many then as there are now. Whenever I talk to students, I try to help people contextualize the fact that when you and I were in law school, it wasn't criminal justice reform and understanding that there are issues in the criminal justice system in America was not really part of just modern or just public understanding outside of the law. And so I started taking these classes and I thought, wow, this is an incredible area of law. I would love to work in this someday. So I took, all the classes that were offered. I did the prosecution clinic, thinking maybe I really want to be a prosecutor, and I just soaked it all up. So it was very clear to me. I found a thing that I cared a lot about and felt like this is a way I could serve the public someday, somewhere in this area.
Wow.
But didn't get there right away, which we can talk about.
Which we're definitely going to talk about. But that's awesome that you really were drawn to something. And yeah, you're right. At the time, we just kind of took it for granted that criminals are bad.
Right.
And, putting them away is good. Like,
Right.
it's crazy how far we've come in that time.
That's right. And it's also, I think, I always talk to students now. I'm surprised when I talk to high school students who tell me not only they know what they're going to major in law school or in undergrad, but they know what they're going to do after they go to law school, and they're going to do this for their job. And I'm always like, well, you know what? You might find there's something else that you're good at or that you like to do, or an area of law you knew nothing about. So I think it's great when people have a strong leaning what they think they're going to do. But I never would have told you that's what I was going to end up doing when I originally decided to go to law school. So
it's good to keep an open mind. Yes,
think so.
I agree with you. People these days way more have like a plan.
Yeah.
So you mentioned softball.
Yeah.
To be honest, when you and I reconnected in Charlottesville, when I came back for this job, that was the number one thing I remembered about you, was that you were really good at softball.
Fair enough. I've actually been talking about how we should do like an alumni team locally, which would be really fun.
Absolutely. A couple of faculty were out throwing the ball around on Holcomb Green, and I walked by, and they were like, they mentioned that same thing.
Yeah,
so
it'd be fun.
Runs deep.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun. I played as much softball as I could, and that's what I played growing up, actually. It was my high school sport. And it turns out to be a really convenient skill to have if you're going to go into the law, because it goes everywhere with you.
Lawyers love to play softball
In
for
fact,
whatever reason.
Yeah, when I went to the first job I took out of law school was with Sullivan and Crummell in their London office. And I started a softball team with a bunch of people who had never played softball before, who were only used to playing cricket. And I kept having to explain to them why they needed to wear gloves.
Oh, God.
And why you could run through first base and all these sort of arcane baseball/softball rules that people in London were not familiar with. But it was a lot of fun. There was like a small kind of softball rec league in London playing a bunch of other American sort of law firms, which was a lot of fun.
So the very first time I met your husband, Philip, I was like, oh, I went to law school with Lisa. And he said, when you guys first were here, you guys were like throwing a dinner party.
Yes.
For a bunch of people. And you were like, I can't help prepare because I have a softball game.
Yeah. So our law school classmate, Wynn Allen, who's now a partner at Kirkland & Ellis, Wynn was our Section L leader of our team. And he was like, you have to come. You can't miss this game. And I was like, well, we're having this party. He's like, we really need you. And Philip was like, is this what our marriage is going to be like? You're going to abandon me to go play softball for someone you just met like a week ago? I was like, but the team needs me. So, yes. Philip remembers that.
Where your priorities were at. Well, and like, for those who don't know, like, if you didn't have enough women on the team, your team would have to forfeit.
That's
so,
right,
like,
exactly.
Not to mention how good you were. So, like, anyways, I get it.
You understand.
So another
Philip and I have been married for 20 years now, so it's worked out.
So. So another extracurricular that I mentioned in your bio, law review.
Yes.
So law review, obviously the most prestigious journal. It's, for the really best of the best in the class. I think nowadays I get a lot of questions about like how important is being on law review going to be like for my career. So I'm just curious like what you think. Did that prepare you?
It's hard to know if it prepared me for my career necessarily, but it definitely stands out as the favorite thing I did in law school because it introduced me to legal scholarship, and that wasn't really on my radar. I mean, in classes, sometimes someone might assign to you a law review article, but it's more common that you're reading a textbook or you're reading cases, and just seeing what people were writing about. And in my job as the essays development editor, we would get to just review the essay and article submissions as they were coming in. And it was just so fun to see what all these really smart professors all over the country were writing about and what were the cutting edges of the law, like what's happening in these different areas. And so that just sparked a real interest of mine. I've never wanted to be full-time in the academy, but I do love trying to teach where I can and just keep up to date on those sorts of things. So that was really, it was influential in just helping me really find the law really interesting. And I think giving me like a long-term interest in staying in the field.
Yeah. That's how I was not on law review, but I was on the Journal of Social Policy and the Law. And that's what I was very focused on at the time, like social policy and stuff like that. And I couldn't agree more. Just this is what some really smart person out there is thinking right this moment. Right. Because when you're reading for class, sometimes you're reading stuff that's like 100 years old or whatever. So
that's right. And the law can seem very cut and dry. Like you're learning a doctrine and you're not necessarily seeing all the nuances that academics are picking up on.
Yeah. So when it came time for you to do like your 1L summer job, 2L summer job, did you ever work with career services? Because that is like way more robust now. I never
No.
spoke to them once.
I didn't speak to them once either, but I do know a lot of people who work in the career services
No,
office
and they're
now,
amazing.
and it's amazing.
And by the way, like 3 of our classmates.
I know. I know.
So no, it's very hands-on these days.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the job landscape is completely different.
Right. I remember sitting over winter break, my 1L year, and printing out copies of my resume and a cover letter that I hand stamped and marked and mailed to like 100 law firms trying to get a 1L summer gig, and that wasn't really very common back then. And I got no responses to any of them, and then got very lucky because a partner I'd worked for with when I was at Mintz Levin before law school had become a partner at Weil Gotshal. And
My old firm.
And he's a UVA alum as well,
Wait.
Tom Frangillo. He's not at Weil
yeah.
anymore. But I had reached out to him and said, I'm trying to come back to Boston if you know of anything. And he was like, you should come, be a summer for us. So as a 1L, I got to summer at Weil, which was
God.
really fun up in their Boston office. And we loved living in Boston, and we were really happy to go back.
Yeah.
So that was how that worked out.
I mean, Weil is
It was
the
the only
best.
job I got, and it was great.
I mean, I did not know this connection. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was excellent.
I was in the New York office, but I worked out of the Boston office like several times, depositions and stuff that were up there. So
Some
really
great
cool.
people. Yeah.
And then what about 2L summer?
Yeah, so I like to tell this story again because I think so many law students are, as we are trained to be as lawyers, very strategic, and I have to do this, and then this falls into place, and every decision has to build on itself. And my very strategic decision making for my 2L summer was I was like, well, I'm definitely going to end up in public service, and we want to live in New York. It'd be really fun to live in New York for a summer. So I'm going to try to get a big firm job up there. Okay. And I had good grades. And so it was easy to kind of get the interviews. And we had to decide, well, which firm should I go to? And my husband, Philip, really wanted to live in Brooklyn. And so we figured out that Sullivan and Cromwell's office was the easiest to get to from Dumbo.
Way downtown.
Where we wanted to live in Brooklyn. And so I was like, oh, great, we'll go with them. So I picked Sullivan and Cromwell for that reason. And then it just so happens that Sullivan and Cromwell was the only U.S. law firm with a U.S. litigation department in London, which became really important after I graduated because they gave me sort of an open offer because they knew Philip was applying for more graduate school. He got the chance to study at Oxford. And so then I said, how about your 2-person London U.S. litigation office?
My God.
And they said, okay, we'll make an exception and you can go do that. But I never could have predicted, 1, that I was ever going to move to London, 2, that it was going to matter that this law firm happened to have a very small practice. So it was a lot of just dumb luck. And, not that dumb luck should be your strategy, but things can just kind of work out and unfold that you can't necessarily predict when you're making decisions.
And they're not making those exceptions for people that they don't want and who aren't already
I think that's
proven
right.
themselves.
It helps that
right?
I had worked really hard and that they knew that I was going to work really hard. So,
well, and I've told stories before on the podcast about how good Weil was to me. I worked in their Paris office. They let me defer my start date to go abroad to clerk.
Yeah.
Like if you... I do believe, maybe I'm naive, that firms, really any employer, if they want you to be happy.
Absolutely. Sullivan and Cromwell was so good to me. I mean, they gave me an incredible maternity leave. My oldest child was born when we were living in London. They helped me move back to the U.S. and transition to their D.C. office. They supported me as I tried to sort of work part-time in their D.C. office while living in Charlottesville. I mean, I could not say a negative thing about how much support they provided when it wasn't as common then for women to, take maternity leaves and come back. I think it's a lot more common now. But they were incredible. And I had the same experience at McGuire Woods with just a ton of flexibility when I would be like, I think I want to try to work 80%. Oh, now I want to change it to 90%. Oh, no. And just so much flexibility. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I feel like this doesn't get talked about enough, how like if you find the right firm for you and you work hard and you're doing good work for them, and that goes without saying, I think there are a lot of great places out there.
I think that's right. And you're right. It's a prerequisite. You have to have demonstrated that you're going to do the work and do the work well. But then I think people can be really committed to helping you make it
Absolutely.
work.
So my next question was going to be, why did you move to McGuire Woods? But was that a location thing because we have a Charlottesville McGuire Woods office?
Exactly. once it sort of realized, we're back in Charlottesville, my husband was finishing his PhD at UVA after the little detour abroad, and commuting to DC really didn't feel that tenable. This was before, virtual work was as widely accepted as it is now. And so I got the chance to get an offer from McGuire Woods in their Charlottesville office, which is small, but of course McGuire Woods is a huge firm with a lot of offices in a lot of places, so I could still practice law, not just in like kind of the regional level, and still do a lot of interesting cases. And I should say all of this was with an eye in the back of my mind towards once my husband finishes his school, I do want to switch to public interest. But for that period of my life, I was really happy to work in these challenging firm jobs that were supporting me as I was learning from them. I was able to pay off all my law school loans. We were able to buy a house. I was able to support my spouse while he was in graduate school. And it was an incredible for our family, and I learned so much and made so many contacts. So it was great, but I did always know this was going to be a relatively short part of my career.
Got it. So at the point where it made sense financially and with your husband's graduate degree and all of that is when you felt, okay, great, I can make the switch.
That's right. So that's when I said, and my advice to people when they go to firms, I think a lot of times law students feel afraid, young lawyers feel afraid to tell a firm, hey, I might not want to stay here forever, or this is what I really want to do. And I always say the whole model only works if most of you leave, right? And firms benefit if you land at another company, at another law, somewhere where you're happy and are referring business back to them. They're referring business to you. It really is a symbiotic relationship. They want you to be happy and go do the thing that you're good at. And so again, you want to do a good job for them along the way. If you just show up and are like, I hate this, help me leave,
of course,
that may not work out so well. But I found that when I could say at McGuire Woods, hey, what I really want to do is this, and that included at that point me giving voice to the fact, hey, I really want to be a judge someday. Can you tell me what to do? Because I don't know. And I got so much great advice from mentors at the firm of, well, here's what you should start kind of thinking about doing. Because at that time I was, how old was I? 32. Had no clue what you needed to do to become a judge. So,
but how did you know? When did that thought occur to you that you want to be a judge, and how did you know that that's what you wanted to do?
So Philip says I told him I wanted to be a judge like when we were dating. And I don't remember that, but he's a pretty trustworthy person, so I must have said it at some point. I think I always, as I mentioned, I've always wanted to do public service of some kind. I think that stems back to my background, sort of the way I grew up, seeing my parents be really involved in their church and community, and just thinking, I want to help other people. My priorities are not just sort of monetary priorities were not the top of my list. So once I sort of thought, well, what can you do in the public service that's like the most interesting? I don't think it was any more complicated than thinking, being a judge seems really cool.
It does seem cool.
And then, of course, when I started actually practicing as an attorney, it seemed like, wow, this is a way you could have a lot of impact on the people in the system, whether you're a trial judge and you're the person who's sort of the face of the justice system, making decisions, or you're an appellate judge, which is ultimately what I decided to pursue, and I'm really honored to have that role where you're making decisions about the law that impact everyone in your jurisdiction. And it's scary, it's really exciting and humbling, but I think I just had an innate idea that this would be what I'd like to do if I could.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get to all of that.
Yeah.
But first, you had you transitioned initially to being a public defender.
That's right.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. So when I was at McGuire Woods, and it was kind of time, it was like the year was kind of coming where I was like, this is the time to make the transition. Philip's going to be graduating. I'm at the point where if I don't leave now, I'm going to get sucked into trying to make partner. And I thought, this is my moment.
There is that kind of like, it's like when you're playing double dutch.
That's
it's
right.
like, I got to stay in or I got to get out.
Exactly. So it was that moment for me. And I knew I wanted to remember back to law school, I loved all the criminal law classes I had taken. I was like, I want to get into criminal law. But going from big law to just like being a prosecutor or public defender, particularly then, wasn't that common. And so I had taken a lot of informational lunches with people in the public defender's office, gotten to know people in the prosecutors at the U.S. Attorney's office here. And there were actually openings in both offices at the same time. And I applied to both, and I thought, gosh, I could do a lot of good on either side of the aisle here, I think, in the system. And the opportunity that worked out for me was in the federal public defender's office. And it was a wild transition, I'll tell you, to go from having all the resources of a giant law firm to being a public defender. At the federal system, you have a lot more resources even than the state system. But compared to a big law firm, I remember early on texting this partner from McGuire Woods, who's still a dear friend to this day, and saying, "Hey, Jonathan, do you want to know how many people read this brief before I filed it in the Fourth Circuit?" None. No one read it. I'm the only one. I finished writing it, and then I filed it. And it was crazy coming from a law firm context where every single thing you wrote was going to be like carefully edited about 1,000 times. And so getting to operate without any training wheels all of a sudden was kind of crazy and also really fun. I loved the challenge of learning something new. I've often said, what an incredible life if you get to be paid to learn like a whole new area of law. And that was true when I went to the public defender's office. And now I feel like that's sort of true in my current role too, where I'm getting every case is sort of about a new topic and maybe a new area of law that I haven't spent as much time in before. And I'm getting to dive in and really understand it. And it's a real gift.
You're like a mini subject matter expert from
trying to be.
Case to case. So in your bio, I mentioned you were the appellate specialist. What does that mean?
So a lot of federal public defenders' offices that are bigger, I was in a pretty small jurisdiction here in the Western District of Virginia. We're seated in Roanoke and have offices in Charlottesville and Abingdon, basically. But in a bigger office, typically there's clear dividing lines of sort of like you're the legal research and writing team or you're the appellate team and you're the trial team. But in our office, I was able to sort of get to do it all. I was hired as a trial attorney. And then as I started doing trials, I had some issues that I would see that kind of crop up and think, oh, that's a really good issue for appeal. And then I would get to write the briefs for the appeals, and I really enjoyed that. And then other people started saying, well, if you want my appeal, feel free. And so I started doing more appeals and then kind of consulting with people in the office about their cases. And I was the point person who worked with the other public defender's offices across the Fourth Circuit when we would have similar cases kind of percolate up to the Fourth Circuit, where we would strategize about cases and help get each other ready. And that was incredibly satisfying to get to work with those brilliant folks from all over the district, who are all over the circuit, who are arguing in front of the Fourth Circuit. So that's what that meant.
I bet in your section you won Best Brief.
I don't think so. I shouldn't be honest, but I definitely looked at I want to do things that are going to get me good grades, and if it doesn't matter, I'm just not spending time on it, which I shouldn't admit, Natalie, but I didn't spend any time on anything that wasn't going to result in a grade. Sorry, you can cut that out.
Legal research and writing.
It's really important.
I kind of want to keep this in. It's really important, but it is pass-fail. Okay, so you're in this new public defender career. You're the appellate specialist. You're working with all these amazing people, doing all this stuff. And at the same time, I believe, after a few years of doing that, you got hired to teach at UVA Law. So how did that happen?
Well, that was sort of something I fell into as well. The person I was hired by in the Charlottesville office of the Federal Public Defender's Office, Fred Heblick, had been teaching the criminal defense clinic for a number of years. And he was getting closer to the age of retiring. And I had sort of said to him, hey, I'd love to help out. If you ever need someone to help with your class, if you ever need, anything, teaching that clinic sounds really great. How did you get into there? And so he sort of saw the handwriting on the wall. Why don't you kind of come co-teach with me for a year and kind of just get the lay of the land. And then when he realized he was ready to kind of start winding down, he just basically called the law school and said, look, I've got this person who can take over for me. So I couldn't have been luckier in terms of sort of just falling into that role and inheriting from Fred everything he had done to run that clinic. And so I did that for a few years, and it was just so fun to get to work with students in that context.
Again, the word luck is used. However, it was proactive to reach out to him. It was making all these things. I just want to point this out.
No, and a big thing I do think I've had to do, which can be hard for anyone, often can be extra hard, I think, for women, is just to say what you want. You know, hey, I really want to teach that class. Yes, I'm young. Yes, I have barely even been a public defender for more than 30 seconds, but can you help me get there? And that's always scary because you don't know. Someone might look at you and be like, what? You teach or you be a judge? But unless you ask for things, people can't help you get them.
Totally. And that's the worst that can happen is you don't get it.
Right.
But oftentimes you do get it. Yeah. So you were teaching the clinic. Were you teaching anything else at the time?
Well, what happened was, no. So I was teaching the clinic, and then the pandemic happened. And there was no ability to go to court.
God. How did that even?
Yeah, so you couldn't go to court anymore. So the criminal defense clinic was put on hold. Our office was overwhelmed with trying to represent people, federal prisoners. So the criminal defense clinic, of course, is just in state courts, local kind of state courts around Charlottesville. And I, as a federal public defender, was really trying to represent all of these federal inmates who had pre-existing conditions that made them very susceptible to complications from COVID-19. And we were filing compassionate release motions for certain prisoners, trying to advocate for them to be temporarily released to home confinement or to be released from custody entirely. And there were other changes in the federal law that meant a lot more prisoners were eligible to be looked at for an earlier release. And so I was sort of like, hey, that's a thing that students could get, actual experience filing motions in federal court, which no other clinic was really at the time providing. And it's a real need right now. Like there's a ton of cases. Students could get to know inmates, kind of talk to them on the phone. We could set up the legal calls. They could do the work and help file a bunch of these motions. And so I started and then it was called the Federal Criminal Sentence Reduction Clinic. It really rolls off the tongue. But the point was we did a lot of work all by Zoom because we were all teaching by Zoom then.
Crazy.
But the students were incredible. They did such great work and they had incredible successes getting people released early from custody where the sentences that they had received, 15, 20 years ago were dramatically more than the sentences they would have gotten today because of various changes in the federal law and the federal sentencing guidelines, and also where people were ill and really at risk of serious consequences from being in prison, when of course that's not where you want to be if COVID-19 is going around.
Right.
So anyway, it was so satisfying, and I taught that for, I guess, maybe 3 semesters before I got this job, and then I couldn't teach it anymore.
Wait, so you started a clinic, basically?
Yeah, I did.
Is it still there?
Yeah, now it's just, I think they've changed it to federal sentencing.
Okay.
So it's still getting to file motions in federal court, but it's not really doing the post-conviction anymore. It's helping prepare for federal sentencing.
That's
so
amazing.
You're still getting to do all the sort of mitigation work to help tell a client's story before their sentencing.
You're really a starter and a founder. The
Maybe.
Tutoring program, the London softball team,
That's true.
clinic.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
I guess so. I certainly, maybe it's the farm upbringing, but it's sort of like if you see something that needs to be done, it's just like, well, you're just good to go do it.
Just do it.
So.
Totally. I love that mentality. Okay, so you were teaching. It was COVID. Oh my gosh. This is right when I came for this job. It was like 2020. Like I remember.
Gosh.
Oh, God.
Dark days.
Dark days. But around this time, 2021, I believe, the Virginia Court of Appeals expanded the bench. So I want you to kind of talk about that. So you had as you mentioned before, you had sort of long wanted to be a judge.
That's right. So I'd long been interested in trying to become a judge. I always thought, as I was practicing in federal court, I always thought for the years that I was a federal public defender, I want to be like a federal district court judge. Like that's what I'll want to try to do. And I was sort of waiting, thinking maybe a position will come open. And right around the exact same time, there was a position that was coming open in the Western District of Virginia, and the Virginia General Assembly, so the Virginia Senate and House, announced they were going to expand the Court of Appeals, and there were going to be all these new seats, and it was a little unclear how many were going to be added at first, but there's going to be these opportunities. And I was sort of presented with the first time for the thought, well, what kind of judge do I actually want to be? Not just sort of like judge this general category, but what would I really like to do? And
because as you mentioned, sorry to jump in, but like there's, if you were on the Western District, okay, you would be a federal judge, but you would be at the trial level versus what you ultimately decided to do, which is state appellate work.
Right. So, and at the time, I think, and it's still the case, people think of federal court as the more prestigious, more interesting place to be. That's where people kind of have historically wanted to litigate. It's where people have wanted to, if you don't want to be a state prosecutor, sometimes you might think it's more prestigious to be a U.S. attorney. And so I think my default reaction was sort of like, oh, well, federal, that's what I want to do. But then I really thought, what would I be good at and what would I enjoy? And I thought, I think I would really not enjoy making very quick decisions on the bench that have a big impact, like being faced with, like, in the middle of trial, having to just make evidentiary rulings, quickly saying, like,
Overruled.
yes, this is what's happening, this is what's happening, and having to sentence people seemed like, wow, that would be really challenging. Having to make credibility calls of, like, who is telling the truth. The respect I have for the judges who do those things every day is immense. I thought, what I think I would be a lot better at and what I might enjoy more is the appellate job. I'd really enjoyed appeals when I got to litigate a bunch of cases in the Fourth Circuit, and getting to watch how that worked and the kind of cases you were getting to see, the issues that you're getting to puzzle over, and the impact those issues would have over the entire region, not just in a single case, was really appealing to me. And so I ultimately decided I'm going to put all my eggs in the basket of the Court of Appeals position.
Yeah.
And so I pursued that, and it was a long process.
Yeah, so I want to talk about this process.
Yeah.
Also, I love that you said it was appealing to you.
Yeah, there
I
you
don't know
go.
if that was intentional. So I will be totally candid with listeners. I already told you this, but in researching for this episode, I was learning for the first time how state judges are elected / appointed. It's different in every state.
Yeah.
There was this one website that was like, as important as state judges are, many people don't know how they get to the bench. I'm like, thank you for saying that.
Yeah. It is not something you learn about in law school, that's for sure.
Yeah, you really don't. So tell us about maybe a brief overview of how it works, at least in Virginia, and how it worked for you.
Yeah. So Virginia is one of only 2 states, where South Carolina being the other, where the legislature chooses the judges. In most states, actually, judges are popularly elected, and then in the other big chunk of states, the governor is choosing the judges. So we are a bit of an outlier.
Just us in South Carolina, I wonder.
I don't exactly know, but there are pros and cons, I think, of all the systems.
Sure.
So the way that Virginia judgeships work is it's kind of one path if you're looking for a judgeship in a certain locality. And then it's a different story a little bit if you're looking for a statewide judgeship. So if you're trying to become a judge in Fairfax County or in Richmond City or in Abingdon, the most important thing is that an opening gets announced, and then the local bar is going to do evaluations for that position. So you can apply to your local bar, and they will do interviews, and they will ask for public comment about the individuals, and they will be making a public pronouncement of who they think is qualified for those positions. And you're simultaneously trying to get the support of the senator and the delegate in that area to also support you. And if you can sort of lock up the support of your senator, your delegate, and the local bar, it's highly likely that then the full General Assembly is going to vote you through to the judgeship. So you're kind of pursuing those avenues for support.
So it's still sort of like it's not dissimilar from where they're elected, because you're still kind of...
Yeah. It's a different audience. The public
audience,
isn't really involved, but you are having to try to get support in the same way that you would be getting endorsements in a public election as well, if that makes sense.
And I think I read for the lower courts, you have to live...
Yes, within the region.
Within the region that you're sort of
that's
deciding
right.
cases. Okay.
Yeah.
So on the Virginia Court of Appeals, there are now... How many judges?
There are now 17 of us. And so the difference in sort of when they announced it, ultimately they added 6 seats in 2021 to the Virginia Court of Appeals, and 2 intervening retirements led to those positions not being filled. So there were 8 open seats at the same time on the Virginia Court of Appeals, which has never happened since the court was first started in the 80s. So that meant that the process for us to get onto the court was different, because there wasn't a kind of a geographic region that corresponded to a particular seat. So it was a much more statewide field of people who were interested in the roles. And geography is still important because people want to see a diversity of judges on every basis. And regions of Virginia feel that they are very different from one another. So people in the Southwest don't feel represented always by people from Northern Virginia. So certainly geography still mattered, but it was a unique time where you were really having to advocate to the entire General Assembly, well, really the members of the House Judiciary Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. And then those committees together came up with a slate of candidates candidates that they were going to put forward. But it was not as geographically specific as it is if you're seeking a local judgeship.
Which makes sense, I think.
Yeah.
Like if you're a judge at the sort of trial level and you're deciding things.
Right. The delegate from Norfolk probably shouldn't have a say on who the judge is in the same way in Charlottesville.
Right.
Yeah.
So did you have a sense, I read this really great article when all 8 of you were, I guess, do you say
elected by the General Assembly.
Okay, elected, okay. Mm-hmm. And it was just really cool because, there was Fairfax, there was all over Virginia. Did you have a sense of who the other people were?
Some of them I knew, but a lot I didn't.
Yeah.
There was a real conscious effort by the Democrats were in control of both the House and the Senate in Virginia in the kind of 2020, 2021 time period. And they were very explicit about saying, we want to see a diverse slate of candidates with respect to racial diversity, with respect to regional diversity, and occupational diversity. And that's where I think I really benefited. That was a similar thing that was happening. The Biden administration was targeting at the federal level, and it trickled into Virginia as well, of people saying, historically there's been one path to becoming a judge, and that has been to be a prosecutor first, and then you become a judge. And that had certainly been the case in Virginia. And so I benefited from the fact that there was a kind of a new interest in saying, hey, maybe it would be helpful to have people with a different background. And because I was a public defender, I was able to sort of say, I have that different background that might be helpful.
And think about that, how if every judge was a former prosecutor, I'm not saying that they would have a prosecution bias, but you could, wouldn't it be nice to know if there was a mix of people? I guess.
I certainly think at least hopefully, every judge is looking at a case fairly under the law, regardless of your background. But I certainly think that I brought to the bench a unique understanding of what it feels like to be on that other side of that table, what the barriers and hurdles are that people face in those situations, what it feels like to sit with someone in a jail and talk to them for a long time.
Yeah.
And at a very least, a different kind of, a mindset. A small example I give when people ask, has being a public defender made you different as a judge? It's very small thing maybe, but whenever I write my opinions, I write them thinking that the audience is not trying to impress a bunch of lawyers or other judges, but I think about, is the person who's going to be reading this in a jail cell for a criminal case, is that person going to understand what I'm saying? Is this going to be something that if I'm saying your appeal is denied, that this person can comprehend with words that they can understand and in a way that makes sense to them? So that is what I'm aiming to do. Whether I'm successful or not all the time, I don't know, but that's a small way that it's impacted me.
I think that's small maybe for you, but that's huge, I think, for a lot of people. So talk about, if you can, again, you're at the appellate level. So as we mentioned before, you're not seeing cases go to trial, right? You're not deciding findings of fact and things like that.
Right.
Something has already been decided at the lower level. And then I read this, I thought this was interesting. Anyone who appeals, you have to take it.
Yes, so that was the big change in 2021. Before that, the Virginia Court of Appeals had no jurisdiction over any civil cases. So if you had a negligence claim, a tort claim, a medical malpractice claim, anything civil except for family law issues, it went right from the circuit court in Virginia. And then you had to seek cert with the Virginia Supreme Court. And they don't take very many cases, just like the United States Supreme Court.
Right,
Exactly. And so the big change in 2021 was we think everybody should have a right to appeal. So with all that additional caseload, there was a need for additional judges.
I see.
It was also the case that before 2021, there wasn't really an appeal of right in criminal cases in Virginia. And by that I mean, if you wanted to appeal your criminal case, you would file a petition also sort of seeking permission to have your appeal go forward. And that would just be reviewed by a single judge on our court. And if you didn't like the result from that one judge, you did have the ability to appeal that to 3 judges. But in 2021, that was all done away with, and you just have a clear appeal of right on the merits. You don't have to sort of petition for review.
Right.
There's no extra procedural roadblocks there to make it
see.
More difficult to exercise your right to appeal.
So if I lose my case at the
trial court level.
Trial court, because we don't call it district court. We just call
circuit
it
court, trial court, yeah.
Circuit court, yeah, okay. So I lose my case in Virginia at the trial court level, and I want to appeal. And I'm going to automatically basically get my appeal heard.
That's right. Yes, and if it's a criminal case, and you are indigent, you also have the right to counsel to help you in that appeal.
And so then you're all over the state.
Mm-hmm.
So then when you go to I guess hear the appeal or whatever, where do you go?
Yeah. So this is another way that Virginia is unique. Most other kind of statewide appellate courts, so North Carolina, for example, right next door, or Maryland, they meet in the state capitol to always hear their cases. They kind of all travel to the courthouse and their main courthouse. By statute, Virginia was set up to have we essentially ride circuit in a way. So the statutes set up so there's 4 regions in Virginia, and for the benefit of attorneys, Virginia is a big state. So instead of making all these attorneys from the Eastern Shore and from Abingdon and Southwest Virginia always drive a long time to get to Richmond, we have to sit in each region of the state periodically. So every time I'm in court, so once a month I'm usually in court somewhere, and I'm either in the eastern region and we borrow a courtroom space from the circuit court in Norfolk or Virginia Beach. I'm either in the northern region where we actually have a courthouse, like a courtroom space now permanently in the Fairfax Circuit Court, or we borrow a space from Alexandria or Arlington. If we're in the central region, then we just use our courthouse in Richmond. And then in the western region, we either sit in Lexington or Roanoke usually. Or for the first time, I'm going to sit in Christiansburg before too long, which will be kind of fun. So
wow, Seaburg. I've heard people call it Seaburg. Oh my God.
I'll try that on, see how it goes.
That's so fascinating. You're not like, oh, well, I'm in court today, and so this is the courthouse I always go to. You're just sort of like...
I like it because you really get a sense for how diverse Virginia is as a state.
My God,
There's just so many different parts of our state. Every locality is so different. I get to see friends who happen to live in lots of different places when I travel around for court. So I actually enjoy that.
It's like we work for judges.
Yeah. I like that.
That's so cool. Okay, so back to this hypothetical person who has appealed.
Yes.
And so now, it's going to be assigned, my understanding is it's going to be assigned to a 3-judge panel, but the judges are random.
Yes.
So it's like, it could be you, it could be someone from Fairfax.
That's right.
And then it could be someone from Abingdon. And then wherever you are on the rotation of where you're going to sit. Or is it based on where they are?
Yeah. So I hear cases statewide, meaning it doesn't matter where I'm. The fact that I live in Charlottesville is irrelevant to what cases I get assigned to. So I will. There's an algorithm that I think Virginia Tech created that tells us, randomly spits out, you're with these 2 people in this region this month, and then you're with these 2 people in this region the next month. And that calendar is just set, and then whatever cases happen to be ripe for review in that region get put on that panel at the time. So, okay. And then you had asked earlier, but, our role, as you mentioned, is not to relitigate the facts. I am not... by just looking at paper, going to be able to say, well, here's what really happened in the courtroom. And here's the tone of voice this witness said a thing in. Or, we are just reviewing the law, essentially. So there's this appellate standards of review. If it's a question of fact, essentially, we're basically going to have to say that whatever the trial court found is correct, unless it's so out there that we would say that no court could have found this. And then when it comes to a question of law, that's where we are applying a de novo standard of review, where we look at it for the first time, regardless of sort of whatever conclusion the trial court may have drawn about the law.
Want to get real-world legal experience while still in law school? Check out Season 6, Episode 1 of the show, where Mason joined me to chat about his externship at the White House, which he was able to complete through the UVA Law in DC externship program.
I will forever be grateful for the opportunity to witness history. I was the legal intern, so I was bottom rung of the totem pole, but the things that I got to work on, the conversations that I got to sit in on, the impact that our office and the Biden-Harris administration made, especially in this moment where it's turning over from one administration to the next, it is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And I am incredibly grateful for the opportunity and for UVA Law in DC for making it possible.
So you're assigned to your 3-judge panel, and then some cases get en banc.
Yeah.
So is that really truly with 17 judges?
Yeah, it's quite the clown show.
So for listeners who by the time this comes out, we will have had Xiao Wang on from the Supreme Court Litigation Clinic. He described what en banc means.
Great.
But for a refresher, it's when the full panel of judges is there.
Yes.
Which, like, for a federal circuit court is one thing. But for this court, that's 17 judges. So
Right. So right now, when we sit en banc, we are borrowing space from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond because it's the only space that we can all fit. But all 17 of us, are in a big semicircle. And it's
so cool.
It's sort of like en banc works at the Fourth Circuit or in the federal circuit courts where, it's whatever judge wants to ask a question, you have to kind of, as a litigant, be ready to turn and see who's talking to you and respond accordingly.
And how often does that happen?
So it's happening now about, I think, 4 to 5 times a year that we have an en banc day where we might hear 2 cases. So it's relatively rare.
Oh, okay. And what is it? Does it have to be just because there's disagreement on how this issue is being decided, or
so some federal circuit courts and then some state courts have certain criteria that they follow. Our court, by statute, it just says for good cause.
Okay.
And that typically means that, hey, there was a dissent in the panel opinion, and when it came around for vote, enough other judges agreed with the dissent and not the majority opinion and think that it's of enough consequence that the case should be reconsidered and possibly overturned en banc. Because on my court, I'm bound to follow any published decision that another 3-judge panel puts out there. So whether I agree with it or not, I have to follow it. It's the inter-panel accord doctrine is what that's called. So any other panel that's published case, I have to follow it. So if somebody publishes a case and a lot of other people think, well, that's not right, instead of being bound by it or hoping that the Supreme Court overturns it, we could take it en banc and try to fix it is kind of how that works.
So you can take it yourself.
We can take it ourselves, but we typically would have the parties have an opportunity to move for en banc review. And usually if there's a dissent in a case, it's a strong signal to the litigants, hey, I might want to move for en banc review because I don't know, maybe other judges agree on the court with the one who happened to be on this panel who saw it my way.
Right. If somebody wanted to appeal a decision that you and your fellow judges have made, then it goes to the Virginia Supreme Court.
That's right.
Okay.
And that's a cert process again. So the Virginia Supreme Court will have writ panels where they'll hear arguments on the cases that they are at least somewhat interested in. And then from that batch, they will decide what cases to actually take and hear on the merits.
And I just have to flag that UVA Law alumna.
Yeah, that's right.
Cleo Powell.
Justice Powell is going to be amazing as our new Chief Justice for
just
the whole
so
Virginia
exciting.
court system.
Yeah, really, really cool.
Yeah.
So how many, when you sort of add up en banc and just sort of the, what do you call it, just regular 3-panel, how many cases are you kind of working on at any given time?
It's a good question. So on top of the sort of, we call them like our merits panels. So that's what I'm going to go and travel somewhere. And usually we hear about 18 cases in that chunk of days.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah. And then we have the en bancs that kind of are scattered through in there. We do have, it's sort of like what, is debated now. Is it the shadow docket, the emergency docket? What do you call it, at the United States Supreme Court? We also have a docket where it's like, well, people are filing motions that need a ruling more quickly, or someone's appealing a bond decision, or here's like an interlocutory appeal, or there's another sort of like reason why something has to be taken out of order. And we have standing panels that deal with all of those things.
I see.
And so that work also is getting kind of interspersed throughout. So it's hard to say, but at any given time, there's probably at least sort of like, 12 to 15 cases in some stage that I'm thinking about working on, like in a month or something. And that's not always going to be really hard, complex opinions that result, but that I'm doing something on.
Right. And as we mentioned before, it's a mix of criminal and civil.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
In one day, you could be hearing like a total mix.
Yeah.
So how long does each one take? I mean,
it's a good question. I mean, it really depends on the subject matter and if it's something that is raising, particularly on the civil side right now, because there was no civil appeal of right before 2021. There are very comparatively few published decisions from our court and the Virginia Supreme Court about civil statutes in Virginia. So if it's a civil case that's coming before us, it is often a novel issue that's requiring, at least for me, a lot more time and energy to really try to, for the very first time, interpret a statute and what it might mean. If it's a case comparatively where there's been lots of law on the topic and lots of decisions, then it's not going to take as long. So it's really hard to say. It's fun because it's the total luck of the draw. The clerk's office is assigning cases at random. So it's not like they say, well, you used to work in criminal law, so we're going to give you the criminal case.
The algorithm is doing it.
The algorithm is doing it all. So it's just sort of like, oh, yeah, you're going to get this case with a tough constitutional issue, or you're going to get this case, and it just takes the time that it takes, which is not a satisfying answer, but that's the reality.
Well, this is maybe a really dumb question, but okay, so you're like, all right, I'm going to Fairfax County for my couple of days of listening to 18 cases or whatever it is. You know who your other two judges are. Have you spoken to them about it before, or are you just like, I know what I'm going to do?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I think this is true of most appellate courts. I didn't know this until I was an appellate litigator in the Fourth Circuit when I was in the Federal Defender's Office. The first time judges are usually talking about a case is during oral argument. And they're talking to each other by asking questions of the litigants and maybe responding to what the litigants have said. So on the normal case, I have not spoken in advance to my colleagues, and I'm just up there knowing what I kind of am coming in with a predisposition to think might be the right answer, the sticking points in a case. And then as I'm hearing what my colleagues are saying, I'm learning oh, this is what he thinks is interesting, or this is how she might be seeing it. And then after the argument, we're all sitting down together for the first time, usually to talk through the case. Now, there are instances where there might be someone on my panel in advance. I might call them up and say, hey, this seems like really weird, or what are you thinking about this thing? So that does happen sometimes, but it's sort of specific to who you might be on the panel with and what your relationship is like with that person, and then also what the topic, a subject matter might be.
How often do you feel that whatever you are coming into it with, whether based on oral argument or based on chatting with your fellow judges, that you change your mind?
So it is the minority of times where I'm going to change my mind. And that's sort of always a sad thing to tell oral advocates, because it's like, but you're doing all this work to get ready for the argument. Are you really saying?
Yeah.
But I will say, while it's the minority, it definitely happens.
Yeah.
So I can think of an opinion I wrote that was a published opinion. And going in, I was sure we were going to say one thing. And my other two colleagues, it became very clear during the argument, thought the same thing. And it was really only afterwards where we were having kind of our decision conference where I was like, it's like the light bulb has gone off. I think it should go the other way. And they were both like, we don't think so, so you better write a dissent. And I wrote the dissent, and then they ended up coming around and joining my dissent, and it became the majority opinion. So we all three changed our minds.
So they read your dissent basically in the process of writing their material. Wow.
And we all ended up, the point being, I'm happy my dissent was ultimately persuasive, but we all three changed our minds in that case from how we went in originally thinking about it. So it does happen that things change and you all of a sudden see something differently, or an advocate is able to make a point in a way that they weren't able to do in the brief process.
Right.
But, really, if you're an appellate attorney, you want to invest your time in writing the briefs, because if I'm doing my job well, I'm going to come into argument. People are like, what do you do all month if you're only in court for 2 days? So what I'm doing is carefully reading all the briefs that you've submitted, and I'm reading all the cases that you cited in your briefs, and I'm looking to see what cases you may have missed or forgotten to cite. By the time I show up in court, if I'm doing my job, I better sort of know what I'm thinking, and I'm going to give you a chance to tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But my kind of MO in oral argument is to just be very upfront. When I was an advocate, I never liked a quiet judge who didn't give me a hint of what they were thinking. I was like, I'd rather you just ask me the question that's on your mind, so I have a chance to tell you otherwise. And so that's what I try to do. Just say, well, here's what it seems like the flaw in your case is. Can you tell me why I'm wrong?
Yeah.
And give them a chance. So
if it's a 3-0 decision, how do you decide who writes the majority opinion?
Well, the same sort of algorithm process has a default author. So we know sort of going in to a case when it first gets assigned, by default, this would be the author if someone else agrees with you. And then if you're the default author and you find that you're on an island and your other two colleagues don't agree, well, then you're writing a dissent.
Okay, and then they decide amongst themselves who's going to write the majority. You've mentioned a couple times published opinions.
Yeah.
So explain for listeners, like there's published opinions and there's unpublished.
Right.
How does that get decided? And what is the difference for like precedent setting and all that?
Well, it's sort of an interesting question that I think courts are wrestling with right now, because functionally, every case that we issue, every opinion we issue is available to the public now, right? Because both published and unpublished decisions are on our website. They're also on Westlaw and Lexis. You can search for them. You can find them. And that didn't used to be the case. So, of course, before the internet, if a decision was published, that's what was coming out in the annual casebook that you could actually then leaf through and find. And if it wasn't published, you didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
And so now what the distinction does is it's designating cases that are intended to have a precedential effect. So these are the cases that are binding other judges across my court and binding lower court judges as well. And those are the precedential batch. And then unpublished decisions, we're sort of saying this is already so decided. It's already completely clear from our existing law. We don't need to publish another case and say the same thing again. So it kind of makes your legal research, I guess, theoretically a little easier. You only really have to sort through the published cases that are hopefully not super repetitive. So it's like narrowing down, these are the cases on this topic that you need to read and know about. Whereas these other ones, if we're not publishing it, that's typically because it's already decided under existing published precedent.
So you mentioned that you're in court 2 days a month. What are you doing the rest of the time? Well, you're reading through all of these briefs that are filed on either side and all of the case law that they're citing, which I cannot even imagine like how much reading that is. I'm very curious. Have you ever suspected that a lawyer is using AI?
I haven't yet had a brief that I thought was written by AI. I have had an intern, was not from UVA, who I asked to do some research and clearly just put it in the AI tool on Lexis and didn't even really hide it and just sort of submitted the result. And I had to sit down with the person and say, like, well, I could do that myself. That's what I wanted. And like, here's how I use the Lexis AI as part of my legal research, but you can't just rely on it. And here's why. And I think people are well aware of, I think there were 2 judges who just got dinged in the last month or so for having orders come out that had, that were citing the wrong record.
Judges were using it.
Yeah. So, I think it's something that everyone needs to learn how to use well. I don't think it's going to go away, but it is something that we have to be careful.
Absolutely.
Double check.
So I'm glad you mentioned intern, because I did want to also ask about, like, you must have some help, either a clerk or an intern, so how many do you have? What are you looking for when you're hiring them?
So I have 3 full-time law clerk positions. I have someone who is hopefully going to stay with me forever, and then I have 2 positions that rotate. And I typically hire someone for 1 or 2 years out of law school or coming off of a firm who wants to do a year or 2 clerkship, and I let people sort of choose what works best for them. And that's an incredible gift to get to work with these really smart folks who are just right out of law school. And then because I'm just lucky to be based here in Charlottesville and so close to the law school, I've been able to have a lot of great interns or externs, and the difference there being externs are getting like actual course credit to work with me over the course of the semester. So almost every semester I have at least 1 intern or extern from UVA, and then over the summer as well, which is really great. Once I had a extern work with me full-time, 40 hours a week. She didn't have any classes for a whole semester. I was her only class, and she was so good.
Wow. How nice that's a win-win for both of you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you've been a judge now 4 years.
Yeah.
My understanding, it's an 8-year election/appointment.
Right.
And then you're up for
reappointment for election.
So you're halfway through. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that's like surprised you in the role, or do you have like a favorite part, or both?
I think what's been surprising is just how interesting it is. You know, like you would think, oh, you've been doing it for 4 years, so you must kind of know most of the things at this point or something. And it is just really fun when almost every panel I have, there's at least 1 or 2 cases where it's like, wow, I've never even heard of that statute or this issue that's coming up. Like no one's raised it before. Gosh, attorneys are so creative, and good at their jobs. And there's so many interesting developments in the law all the time to stay on top of. And statutes are constantly changing because every year, there's new statutes and amendments that are coming out. So it really is just such a fun, if you like the law and you're a bit of a nerd inside, it's like really fun to see how many new and interesting and different things there are all the time.
Yeah. And you're back teaching.
Yes.
I mentioned this in your bio. You're teaching 2 classes.
Yeah, this fall I'm teaching, this is my second go around at teaching a class on state constitutions, basically litigating under state constitutions. And in the spring, I'll be teaching for the 3rd time with Tim Hafey, this class that we call Law and Riots.
I read the description. I feel like it sounds very relevant to our times.
Yeah.
Tim Hafey. Wow, I wish I could.
Fun.
Can I audit this?
Yeah, come on. No, I mean, the idea, there was a time when Tim was the U.S. Attorney in the Western District of Virginia when I was in the Public Defender's Office. And we actually, I forgot, back then we started teaching this criminal justice reform seminar together. So I didn't mention that earlier. But we kind of taught it from our different perspectives of like him coming from a prosecutor side and me from a public defender side, but what was happening in the broader field of reform in all these different areas. And then we stopped doing that at some point when we'd done it for a couple of years, and we thought, what's something else that'd be fun to teach about? And Tim has done a lot of work with universities and also localities doing after-action reports where there have been real civil disorders and tragedies. So he was hired by the city of Charlottesville to do an aftermath report of the August 11th and 12th Unite the Right rally and everything that came out of that, and then has had a lot of other experiences, including working with the January 6th Select Committee. And I was a public defender who actually represented a number of people who had involvement and were charged with crimes coming out of the August 11th and 12th Unite the Right rally, and had done I litigated in the Fourth Circuit whether the federal Anti-Riot Act was constitutional or not, and was successful in getting about some of that law struck down as unconstitutional. And so that gave us both an interest in sort of like, what are all the complicating factors about what's constitutional and what's not, and how do you protect people's rights to protest, and how do you help cities respond to these things, and what works well from the law enforcement side, and just a whole cluster of questions that we've dealt with as a country for a very long time. And so we try to trace it back to kind of see what was happening starting with lynching mobs, in the early kind of 1900s, tracing through sort of civil rights movement in the 1960s through to kind of present day. And there's no shortage of material.
I was going to say, I mean, how cool that you're teaching it using your 2 perspectives from different sides. I mean, this is what I feel like law school, especially UVA Law, is all about, right?
Yeah.
Arguing for both sides and arguing that, I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a real gift to get to talk about those really hard questions we don't certainly have all the answers to, and hearing how students are thinking about them year after year.
And now as a faculty member, I'm curious, do you have a new perspective on UVA Law, or does it make you think differently at all about your time as a student, or how? I feel like that must be interesting.
I think certainly as a faculty member, but also as someone who's hiring lots of interns and from lots of different schools, I'm certainly biased to thinking that the students that are coming from UVA are just so incredible in terms of the training they're getting from the law school here and the way they're thinking about tough issues and their desire to be in the mix, to go do hard things after they graduate and to not shy away from the difficult questions facing us in our times today. So that really stands out to me as something I think UVA continues to do on the front end with recruiting, and then just how people are being trained to kind of get out there on whatever side of issues they end up on, they're involved in the conversation.
Sounds like that admissions office knows what they're doing. Just kidding. So before we wrap up, because I've taken up so much of your time, I could honestly talk about this all day. You've been in Charlottesville now
a long time.
Since
since the better part of 2005.
Yeah, since we started. So 20 years with some stints away.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I've run into you around town a couple times, but I don't know the answer to this question. What do you have a favorite spot?
Favorite spot. So we live in I don't know. This is not a real. It's taken me a long time to embrace that Charlottesville's not a real city, but it is also. It is what it is. It's a great place to be. So the Midtown area.
Midtown. I've never heard that.
Which is 3 blocks, but
but you do live in Midtown.
I do.
That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we are super fond of a couple of the restaurants in that sort of part of town, Oak Heart Social and Black Cow Chop House. And so I have 3 kids, so, busy family life, which I like to mention as well, because I think people often don't talk about their families, and it's part of who I am and what I do. But when we can abandon our children for a quick a quick bite at one of those places, we love to do so. So love to hang out there. I love to go to the ACAC.
Yeah.
And another favorite place is certainly the Fry Springs Beach Club, which is like a community pool where we spend a ton of time in the summer with a lot of our families and friends.
Awesome. So. And I have to say, your husband, who has been brought up a few times, has opened a bookstore.
Yeah, he has. So lifelong dream of his. He just is opening it up now, and it's in Midtown, which I use air quotes for, in the gallery space of the Doyle Hotel. So that's a really fun family project. And now the kids are even more into books than they were before, and helping him scan in books and recommend books to people, which is a pretty fun little family project.
It's just the best. And as listeners know, I am a reader, to the core, reading fanatic.
Yeah.
And so any more bookstore content, and
it's been fun for me because I also love, I do so much nonfiction reading for my job that fiction is such a great escape for me. I just love listening and reading fiction, listening to fiction and reading it whenever I can, as a way to cleanse my brain at the end of the day.
Yes.
And being around so many books at the bookshop has just made me even want to read even more. So
I would go bankrupt.
It's so fun.
I would go bankrupt if I was around the store that much.
Come go bankrupt at Phillips Shop.
I will.
Yeah.
I will. So before we wrap up, a lot of listeners, most listeners, I think, are at least thinking about applying to law school if they're not already in the process. So what advice would you give somebody who's at that stage right now?
I would say the law is an incredible profession because there are so many things you can do with it. With that said, I will always tell people, if you aren't sure you want to go to law school, please don't go to law school, because I have met over the course of my career a lot of unhappy lawyers who have taken on a lot of debt because they thought they wanted to go to law school, and then they end up doing things they don't love to pay for that debt, and it can be an unhappy profession if that's your circumstance. So that's a depressing thing to say, but if you have thought about it and you've done, you've worked somewhere and you've thought that this is what I want to do, there's no greater choice you could make. So I think it's really incredible. It's just, I would say, don't fall into the trap of being I'm not really sure what I want to do, so I'll go to law school. I think that is not the best plan.
Agreed. It has to be thought out and intentional. And if it is the right choice, I think are a few things that are as rewarding.
Sky's the limit in terms of what you can do.
Yeah.
I still love thinking about, I love what I'm doing. I hope I get reappointed to the same position in 4 more years. But if I don't, there's so many other fun things I could still do.
Yeah. Oh my God, you could do literally anything.
Yeah, it's great.
And on that note, I want to read a quote of yours that I read researching for this article, because I thought it was just really important for people to hear, because I feel, as we said, young people today feel like they need to have everything planned out. And so I just think this speaks to that. Careers are long, so don't feel intense pressure about the first move you make. Think more about the story you can tell with each of your positions and how they fit a larger picture. This is so, such great career advice, but also from an admissions perspective.
Yeah.
Not everything in your application has to be so linear, but tell me where you're coming from.
Yeah.
How did you get from A to B?
Yeah.
That's really what matters, the authenticity of it, and following what you're interested in, even if that doesn't pan out.
Yeah.
I would much rather see someone who kind of followed what they were interested in, and then maybe that led them to something else.
Yeah. I agree with what I've already said. What can I say? No, I think a lot of times I would say, my career path, don't try to follow it, right? It doesn't make any sense to say, if you want to be a state appellate court judge, you should work in mostly federal court. You should work in not that many times in the Virginia courts you're going to actually be, working in as an appellate judge. It's just sort of opportunities present themselves, and take advantage of them when you can, and can't feel too stressed about, this is the way that people say you should get from here to there.
For sure. And going back to what you said earlier, what we both said, work hard wherever you are.
Yeah.
And I think things will work in your favor.
I think that's right. I think that I have learned, I I've had to do a lot of asking for help, for people to, will you please call up your congressperson? Will you please say, Lisa Lorish is worth interviewing for this judgeship. You should consider her. And I don't like to ask people for favors. But what I've learned along the way is people want to help you.
Yes.
And most people really do want to help other people succeed. And so if you work hard and you ask for help, I think people will really want to give it to you.
I could not agree more. And I think that is a great note to end on. Thank
Great.
you
Well,
so
thank you.
much, Lisa.
That was so fun.
Awesome. This has been Admissible with me, Dean Natalie Blazer, at the University of Virginia School of Law. My guest today was my classmate, class of 2008 alumna, and Virginia Court of Appeals Judge, Lisa Lorish. For more information about UVA Law, please visit law.virginia.edu. The next episode of Admissible will be out soon. In the meantime, you can follow the show on Instagram at Admissible Podcast. Thanks so much for listening, and please remember to rate the show wherever you listen to podcasts.